So our second speaker is Professor Sassoli, Marco Sassoli, from the University of Geneva. He teaches international humanitarian law and international public law here, and he's also the chairman of Geneva Call. And he's going to present the importance of information and technology for international humanitarian law. Thank you.
Hello, good evening. Thank you for having invited me. My story is less moving because it's typically a lawyer story, which is on the one hand, on the other hand. Because information technology is helpful and is at the same time a risk because it's used by human beings and human beings also use it to the detriment of people affected by war. Indeed, my subject should be information technology for humanitarian law, but humanitarian law is just a branch of international law. Obviously, information technology is of interest for scientific debate and so on, but that's not the point you are interested in, but it's whether it's useful for the people who should be protected by international humanitarian law. And the aim of humanitarian law is to protect as far as possible people affected by armed conflicts. And I think there are different aspects in which information technology is already useful in this field, in the field of prevention of violations of humanitarian law, in the field of respecting humanitarian law by parties to armed conflicts, be that states or non-state actors, in the field of monitoring, and in the field of sanctions or reactions to violations. Now, in the field of prevention, I think for training, obviously, as you know, information technology is very useful, also because it is able to reproduce real life situations much more realistically than lectures in a university. For instance, I made the experience, but that was under the former government in Canada, that the Canadian forces were training military people through not video games, but a test. Before they were able to go to Afghanistan, they had to pass through a test where they had to react in, I think, 25 situations, shoot or don't shoot, and they had to decide within something like 5 seconds whether they shoot or don't shoot. And if they made more than, if my recollection is correct, but I'm not sure, 6 mistakes, they were not leaving, but they had to take another training. Also, for the teaching for different publics, obviously online courses, I shouldn't say that because here in Geneva we still believe that students should come to Geneva because then you can take a lot of money, while obviously online courses are the future also from an environmental point of view, because then all these people don't have to travel and they don't have to have an apartment in Geneva, but they stay at home, but can benefit from the same training. Even with computer games, that's something I was personally involved in. We noticed, obviously, as you know, that a lot of young people play computer games, and a lot of computer games are about war, unfortunately. And from a humanitarian law point of view, the problem is that nearly all computer games don't matter about rules of humanitarian law. Also, these people play war, and war has rules, and therefore it's essential to train young people who play war. I would suggest they shouldn't, but I mean, if they play war, they should play it realistically, which means there are rules. We made an analysis with Pro Juventute and Trial of computer games available in Switzerland. The good news is that only few of them, but nevertheless, some of them give you even a premium if you violate humanitarian law. So, for instance, torturing, or there was even one with torturing. Most of them are simply neutral. Whether you violate or you comply, it doesn't matter. And that's also the wrong message, obviously. And only a few, which would be, in my view, much more realistic. One of the challenges of a real soldier today is that if he shoots at an innocent person, he gets a lot of problems with his superiors, with the courts, with public opinion, and so on. And then, finally, mobilization, thanks to information technology, against violations in favor of new rules, for new mechanisms. The problem is, you know that it's easier to mobilize people if it is on one subject, say, child soldiers, landmines, while if it's generally respect international humanitarian law or respect civilians, everyone is in favor of respecting civilians. The bad issue is that those who kill civilians say, oh, these are not civilians, these are terrorists, and so on. And then things become complicated, and there it's much more difficult to mobilize. Now, on respect, I must say I made one experience which was really positive on our information technology. You know, in the International Committee of the Red Cross, one of its traditional tasks is to re-establish family links, and whenever there is an armed conflict, there are armed clashes, families are separated and people don't know where are their relatives. And last year I was in Pakistan, where, in my view, and in view, I would say, of most people outside Pakistan, there is an armed conflict. There are even several armed conflicts, and there are a lot of displaced persons, but they are not really re-establishing family links problems, because nearly all families, even in those regions, someone has a portable phone. And therefore, if they have to flee, their relatives find them because the phone number remains the same. It's very easy, but... And even on humanitarian assistance, this is rather a delicate thing, and one has to think well about it. But if you think how much money is spent to transport humanitarian assistance to faraway places, and the security issues which are involved, and the changing of the local market which is involved, if you can simply transfer to the beneficiaries by portable phone money, and the beneficiaries buy goods on the local market, this would be an incredible progress. Obviously, there are problems because you have to make sure that there is not one local landlord who obliges all of them to give the money to him, and then they buy weapons with that. But nevertheless, if you think about how much of the money we give for assisting flood victims goes, even if there is no money lost by corruption and so on, but simply, okay, sorry for the Geneva students, because you get less jobs to bring food there, because these people, they know how to get food. Simply they don't have the money to buy it on the local market, and not in all cases, but in many cases, it's not really a problem that there is not enough food on the local market, but simply that there are displaced persons who don't have the necessary means to buy. To find missing persons, also through information technology, by comparing what is called, sorry for that, ante-mortem and post-mortem databases. When there are missing persons, the family often has still some information, and those who find the body have also some information, and you have to match that, and this is possible through information technology. To collect information for proportionality evaluation and precautionary measures. You know, when you make an attack in an armed conflict, you may only attack military objectives, and you have to comply with the proportionality principle and take precautions. And this needs information. And so while the military use information technology to acquire the targets, to know where are the targets, this same technology is useful to know how many civilians are around, where are these civilians going, how do they move, what is the risk that more civilians come on, and so to make the precautionary measures. And it makes also the proportionality evaluation more objective. You know, when I speak with military people and tell them, okay, by the way, Switzerland was in favor of this initiative because, you know, this was one of the few things they are still special is humanitarian law. So whenever they get an idea on how to have an international event on humanitarian law, they take it. But this one, they took the idea from me and some of my colleagues that one should have a meeting of practitioners, military people, humanitarian people, on how to calculate proportionality. And the military were against that, because obviously a clearly excessive attack is a war crime. And so if no one knows how to calculate excessiveness, you will not have you don't risk to be sentenced. But if you have, for instance, a computerized system, there you cannot say all depends and you have to do it in good faith. You have to give indicators and you have to say finally, how do you compare a military advantage with a human life? And how many human life is it worth to destroy, say, a company headquarters and so on? And these are very delicate things to discuss from an ethical point of view, but I prefer to have such a discussion than simply to say it all depends and it's the commander in the field who has to decide. And there I think information technology can help. Finally, let's speak about drones and automated weapons. I know many of you, most of you must be very critical about it, but this is because they are used outside armed conflicts, or if they are used against people who are not military objectives. But if you start from the idea that they are used in a genuine armed conflict against legitimate targets, the information technology permitting a drone to hover for quite some time until they are really sure that this is the right target and that no civilians are around, or they wait until less civilians are around, compared with a pilot in an aircraft who has to go home and who is afraid that he's shot down and who will not wait. I think that can be progress, and unfortunately only human beings can be inhumane, and therefore if certain tasks can be done by a robot, the advantage of a robot, but this is very controversial and we may discuss about it, is simply a robot can never deliberately not do what he was told to do, while human beings, and many violations of humanitarian law are because of hate, racism. A robot cannot be racist. But the problem is we have to develop the technology because obviously you may use a robot to conduct certain acts in warfare only if the robot is at least as good as a human being. But believe me, having worked with soldiers, I was never a soldier. Yeah, I was a soldier in the Swiss army, but they don't make war. But I was rather on the side of the humanitarians. They are often not so reliable. I must admit that I make more mistakes than my car. Okay, that's another point. Then we have nevertheless to admit that information technology has also some downsides. First, precisely on the drones, for instance, it makes it easier to make an attack without the attack being attributable. The Americans say this is CIA